So the Buddha's view is that, like we're saying, that everything we do, say and think necessarily sows seeds in the mind. Necessarily. And then virtuous actions, which are those we must practice, we've got to leave bucket loads of virtuous seeds in our mind. If we hear this, it's quite sobering. And a virtuous action, remember, is an action you do based upon a pure motivation. So we look at most of our day like a normal life, right? We're mostly on autopilot, aren't we? Get up, have breakfast, go to the toilet, go to sleep, get up, have lunch, do this, do that, go home, make a phone call, pick up, go to work, do the things, pay the bills, look at the internet. Most of the things we're doing are just the busy details of an ordinary life. And you think about it, unless you have, unless you are living in vows, or unless you're doing work that serves these very potent objects called Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, or the Guru, things that represent that, unless we're doing either of those things, there's virtually not much merit created at all. Because most of us don't have very strong realization of emptiness. Most of us don't have a strong realization of bodhicitta. So most of the time we're being nice people. That's mainly, like I said, we're resting on our laurels from having such virtue from past life that we don't need to be avoiding murderers and rapists and ants and rats, That we just have to float along. We probably don't meet many rats and many cockroaches, and so we're not even intending not to harm them. And if we don't have any vows, then we only create the merit, as Dhamma says, we only create the merit of not killing, the proactive, intentional decision to not kill. The only time you put a virtuous seed in your mind of non-killing is when you consciously, intentionally, meeting a sentient being, decide, I won't kill it. Mm-hmm. Now, how often is that in a day? Not too often, is it? So we have to have bucket loads of the virtuous karmic seeds of the mere refraining from non-virtuous actions first. That's called the practice of the morality of restraint, which is the morality in the first and second scopes, or junior school and high school, or the wisdom wing. And that's really powerful, necessary to have this. So, unless we meet a sentient being to consciously not kill, we're not ticking over any virtue. There's just no virtuous karma of non-killing, and we need masses of those karmic seeds. So as Venerable says, if you're living in a vow to not kill, you've taken a vow on your knee in front of somebody who represents the Buddha for you, and you consciously keep it every day, and you purify every night. The power of vow, and this is from Lord Buddha himself, is such that 24 hours a day you are keeping that vow, even when you're not thinking about it, when you're asleep, when you're on the toilet. Because of the power of vows, you're constantly creating virtuous karmic seeds and purifying your mind. So basically, Rinpoche is saying, the karma that we must have created just to give us this decent human life, the virtuous karma has to have been practiced in the context of not just a spiritual practice, but in the context of keeping vows, because he says being good is just not enough. It just doesn't have enough power. When we get this, we really would be depressed not to have vows, And this is just the bare bones, basic level of the 5 layperson's vows. Not killing, not lying, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, and no intoxicants, any or all of those 5. And then on top of that, of course, if we've entered into the bodhisattva path, we have our bodhisattva vows. And these are so powerful that we carry them from life to life. And then on top of that, the most powerful are all the tantric vows and the various commitments in relation to those vows. So they all the lamas say that vows are so potent that without them, you just can't get ahead of the game. You just can't. Virtue is not powerful enough. So, vows are intensely important. And not just in a superstitious way, you have to understand the logic of it. Of course, we have to think about it because it's not evident to us immediately. But we're sitting in this room right now, right? And if there's no intention to not kill, and that's because we're not meeting a sentient being, then there's no thought to not kill. Therefore, there's no karma of not killing. You have to have the thought. Intention is thought. And if there's no thought, there's no karma. So if you have a vow not to kill, You don't have to think about it. 24 hours a day, ticking over virtue and purifying your mind. This is the first thing. And second, as Rinpoche says, we're insane not to do the purification practice every day. So that's where you reiterate, where you regret any weakened or broken vows, you have compassion, but and then regret anything you've done wrong, what's negative, that's harmful to others. Then you have compassion for others, then you do the practice, and then you continue to reiterate your vows, and you make strong and firm commitments to not do this and not do that again. This is how you get ahead of the game. So not only do you refrain from doing more negative actions, you actually purify the ones you already planted in the first place. It's just and you've got this level of practice, you can be content. You've got all the conditions ready for a decent human birth. Add a bit of, practicing of the Buddha and a few mantras and things like this, which is from university level, and faith in the Guru, faith in the Buddha, all this, a perfect practice. But if you don't keep your vows, but rush off and watch your breath every day, complete waste of time. A complete waste of time. I repeat. Thieves need mindfulness. Watching your breath is not in its nature a virtue. It's a very simple point. It's just a physical action. Communists can do it, like I said. It's not a virtuous action. In its nature, it's not virtuous. It's only the context that makes it virtuous. There are some actions that are in their nature virtuous. So thinking of the Buddha for a few minutes, infinite more virtue in your mind of purification than watching your breath for countless eons. You could argue that. You could say that. I have to understand why, of course. I just blindly believe it. But there's such an addiction in the West to thinking that, when people say meditation, this kind of all-encompassing label, this magical thing called watching your breath, mindfulness, as if it's some kind of special thing. Of course it is. Mindfulness is like not forgetfulness. But it's a technique of concentration that absolutely Buddha runs with and says we need necessarily in the long term to be able to get to the subtle level so we can realize emptiness. But in and of itself, no big deal. Nothing special. Like I said, communists can do it. Thieves need mindfulness. Murderers need concentration. Psychopaths need alertness. Okay, so purification, what does it mean? Well, as Lama Yeshe says, we create negativity with our minds, and so we purify it by creating positivity with our minds. And in just the same way, it's a natural law that if you're practicing the piano, every time you play the right note, you're weakening the tendency to play the wrong note, aren't you? It's hardly rocket science. You don't keep playing the piano and get better and better, but it doesn't touch the playing of the wrong note. That's just completely contradictory. The two can't fit together, So it's just natural that creating virtue is what weakens non-virtue. It's just logical, natural law. Nothing special, Well, very special. So, okay, the 4 R's is always the way I like to talk about it. You see in the different practices, there are different order of these 4 steps, the 4 opponent powers, as they're referred to. The 4 R's is a good way to remember. And, most of us have got maybe initiation into the practice called Vajrasattva, which is one of the best practices to do. All the lamas would praise that. And that's the third that's what you do. You do that as a third of these 4 opponent powers. It's one of the 4 steps you do. But many of us have taken, we just do, Dhamma Vajrasattva mantra, blah, 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 But if you don't engage in each of the 4 steps properly, appropriately, psychologically, with your own mind, you're missing the point of purification. So the first one, Ramazopa says, that's the main one, regret. So what that is very specific. And I always tell this story of His Holiness, his answer one time. And if you've heard it again, we'll hear it again. It goes in like, the penny will drop one day. His Holiness was asked one time, what's the difference between guilt, this state of mind that we are very, very familiar with, this neurotic, self-hating, self-blaming, neurotic state of mind. It is not a virtue in its nature. So he says, guilt, you look in the past and you go, I did this and I did that and I did this, and then you go, and I'm a bad person. We all know that really well. We're super familiar with it. We assume it's a logical deduction that if you do a naughty action, you're a naughty person. But it's an over-exaggeration. It's a distortion. It's an embellishment. It's a delusion. It's internalized anger. You listen to what it is when it's another person. You did this, and you did that, and you did this, and you're a bad person. It's exactly the same as guilt. The difference with guilt is you're the object, that's all. But it's a state of mind called anger. It's very simple. Keep it simple, please. Guilt is anger against you, which is an over-exaggeration of your bad qualities. It's not clear, it's not precise, it's not grown up, it's self-pity also. But it's very natural for us. We run to it like a magnet. So what's guilt? What's regret, as His Holiness, as the Buddhists call it, regret. He said the first part's the same. You look into the past. You recognize, I did this, I did that, I did this, the negative ones. But then you say, what can I do about it? That's what regret is. So there's one more piece in there, though, which is really important to get, and we need to emphasize it clearly when we do the practice. And that's why all the lamas use the analogy of having eaten poison. So we know perfectly well, if someone points out that there's poison in your dinner, instantaneously you will go, oh my God, what an idiot. Quick, what can I do about it? Of course you will. And why is because we know logically that eating poison will cause me suffering. It's obvious, completely obvious. We know that. That's the view we need to get familiar with here. And we're not at the moment. The first thing we think of is we know we did something naughty and then we over-exaggerate our badness and sit in misery and go, I'm a bad person. So how foolish if someone told you that you've got poison in your dinner and you've eaten it and you go, oh, I ate poison, I'm such a bad person. And you sit there getting guilty and sicker, never thinking to do something about it, which is what guilt makes you feel, just sit there in your misery. Completely ridiculous. A useless state of mind. This means we have to get the clear point, Buddha's point, which takes us time, to recognize that our engaging in an action that's labeled negative, which in general, first of all, the main one, is one that harms another, but it's based on a negative reason, a negative motivation, anger or attachment mostly, that will sow a seed in my mind that will ripen as my future suffering. Just like the poison. And this just takes time to cultivate that view because we're so addicted to the guilt one. We run to it. But it's got nothing to do with intelligent regret, which is a wholesome, intelligent, proactive state of mind. So we have to cultivate it. And that means when we go through the list of the various things, depending on how you do it, there's various methods. Maybe you can just think of the things this day, your particular old bad habits, bad-mouthing your boss or yelling at the husband or beating the kid or whatever, understand. Things today, then you go, well, I regret that, but you have to speak it out. And you've got to ask yourself, well, why? Don't just kind of buy into the miserable, I'm a bad person, which is how we feel. You go, I regret this because you know what, and you're talking to yourself here, because you know what, Robina, I'm sick of the suffering. And you know you are sick of the suffering. Even if it's just the fighting and the misery that goes on in the relationship, and you're so fed up with it, and the unhappy feelings, and the people you're upset and everything. But the first thing is you have to see that you're sick of the suffering it causes you. This first step's like renunciation. You've got to cultivate this view that your actions that happen to be ones that harm others, which are based on delusions, will ripen as suffering for you. We've got to stop and think this because this is the basis of regret. It's for you. Compassion comes next. We've got to really cultivate this. We've got to gloss over it. We say the words, oh, I regret doing any blah, I regret blah, 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 We don't give it any thought at all. We have to engage in it. That means we've got to recognize that I'm sick to the teeth, up to here. I'm sick of suffering. Of course, depending on the level of suffering, you can talk about the 3 or the 1 or the whatever, whichever one makes sense to you. You regret from the depths of your heart, you say, because you know what, I'm sick of suffering. Fed up to it. You've got to say that. That's the basis of regret. It's like compassion for yourself. Then you go, whom can I turn to? Where's the doctor? Reliance. This has got 2 parts. The first part is you turn to the doctor, and that's the relationship a Buddhist has with the Buddha. So this is a big difference here. If you're a Christian, very different relationship. You will turn to Jesus indeed, but you turn to Jesus and you have to beg him to forgive you. That's why everybody in the West always says, well, where's the forgiveness in Buddhism? People always ask this. Because it's from this particular model, isn't it? It's this philosophical view that when you do a bad thing, you go against God's will. So purification is necessarily God forgiving you. And that's our cult. That's how we are with our relationships. You know, if I badmouth my friend Jane, yet again, I've got to go, we have to ask her to forgive me. And, you know, and if she doesn't, I'm in trouble, aren't I? We're desperate for the forgiveness. But part of it for us is just, I'm wanting her to get me off the hook. All I'm thinking about is, you know, I'm at work and I'm worried she's going to reject me. So I ring her up, I'm so sorry, Jane. I mean it, but really I'm desperate for her to say, it's all right, Robina, I still love you. Phew, I think I've got off the hook again. That's not enough. That's why forgiveness, being forgiven, is really nice. But much of the time we use it as ego, you know. It doesn't make any difference. As long as I don't do the fourth step, which we're going to get to, where I say, I will not do it again. Until then, nothing will change. Or she does get me off the hook. It's not enough. And anyway, you don't ask Buddha to forgive you. You could. He's a nice fellow. He would. But it's not his job. Nothing to do with him. The doctor doesn't have to tell you, it's all right, I forgive you, you won't get cancer now. It's just superstition. So we use Buddha as our doctor. We rely upon him. And that means two things. This is what refuge is. You have to first have a confidence he's a decent doctor. You just don't go to any old Joe because he's got a cute nose or something. It's stupidity. You've got to have confidence he's a valid doctor, and you'll only get that by thinking about him, reading his teachings, checking up, you know. But then the other thing you've got to have for valid reliance, refuge, is you've got to want his medicine. You've got to be sick of suffering. You've got to want either preventative or remedial, isn't it? Then and for this reason you turn to the Buddha. Whom can I turn to? Who can give me the medicine that I can use to purify me? Because I'm sick of suffering. It's all about me so far still. This is renunciation. It's really important. Spell it out. Then the second part of reliance is now where you bring in the sentient beings. This is what we call compassion. And it's a curious one for us because what do you mean compassion, reliance? It's called reliance. Well, Tibetans have this way of talking. You know, it's very valid. You listen to it. Here now, I'm trying to cultivate compassion. Before, I'm trying to get renunciation and recognition of suffering and be sick of it so I can regret my actions because I'm sick of suffering. Here now, I'm going to want to cultivate compassion. I want to cultivate compassion. So what do you need for compassion? Suffering sentient beings. If you don't have suffering sentient beings, you can't have compassion. So in that sense, the way they frame it is, you need suffering sentient beings. You rely upon suffering sentient beings. It's an odd way to put it, but that's the logic of it. Without suffering sentient beings, you can't possibly have compassion. And if you're a really serious practitioner, as Geshe Sopa said one day, smiling with a pink face, you know, sweet face always, he passed away now, he leaned forward and he said, Bodhisattvas need their enemies. Top one, your enemies. Best one for compassion. So this reliance is called. So the first one is refuge. And you don't just go, oh yeah, Sangha Kana, not Sangha Kana, Sangha Chudang. You say the prayer, oh yeah, take refuge, take refuge, blah, 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 blah. No, got to have a delight in your heart. You found a decent doctor, like won the lottery, got a decent doctor who can give you good medicine. Great, I'm so happy to meet the Buddha, you know. Like say it in your own words. Say a prayer, it's nice. You better say a prayer, yeah. But you understand. Not just take refuge, do my mantras, go to sleep. Boring. Nothing will happen. It's like you say, oh yeah, I put the axe on I tried to chop the tree down today. He went kunk, kunk, and went back to sleep. Didn't do any good. Got to whack it hard. Much effort in it. With each step. Got to be sincere. The more effort you put in, the more likely some result. We all know that. So, and you think about now the second part of reliance, the second step, you think of those you've harmed. I think of Jane. I think of her suffering. I've got to think of her. First it's me. I'm sick of the suffering. I've got to be sick of the suffering it causes me. Then I can think of Jane. Because that's the point. As these teachings say, you cannot have valid compassion until you have renunciation. I'll explain later, maybe tomorrow. So, now I think of those I've caused harm to. I think of Jane. I think of my other friends. Then you think of throughout your life, what the things you regretted, the abortion, the this, the fishing, the that. And then, of course, in the regret one, the first step, you might as well go, and I regret anything I've ever done since beginning this time with my body and speech to any sentient being ever, period. Regret the lot. You must. Of course you do. Because those seeds are sitting in your mind, waiting to ripen as you're suffering, and you do not want suffering. It's pretty logical. So here now you have compassion, particularly the people in this life, or the ones particularly at the moment, blah, blah, your relationships, whatever. And then if you're brave enough, compassion for those who harmed you. This is a tough one. This is a brave one. If you're not ready, don't do it, okay? Don't force, don't pretend. If you can, go for it. And the logical reason for why you should have compassion for someone else, because guess what? If they've harmed you, they're going to suffer in the future. So of course you have compassion for them. Of course you do. Don't make it like patronising. That poor person, they're so pathetic. They all these mean things to me, poor me, they're going to suffer. Oh, I'm so sorry for them. You've got to be really sincere about it, you know. But first you've got to really regret the harm you did to them. Because guess what? What caused them to harm you? Because you caused them harm in the past. So you can't escape from it. You've got to take responsibility. Regret from the depths of your heart. Then it's easy to have compassion for the ones who harm us, including the rapist, including the monstrous father, including the ugly ex-husband, including the real baddies, okay? Once you've got renunciation down, compassion is falling off a log easy. We'll talk about that more later. Then the third step, you do the practice. This is, and the third step is called the antidote. Sometimes it's called the antidote. And anything is the antidote. So if you regretted killing, well, go and save a few lives. Go and help sick people. If you regret lying, tell the truth. These are the antidotes. It's obvious. You must do that anyway, the opposite to what you're regretting. But this practice that all the lamas praise as a really potent antidote is called, the practice of the Buddha Vajrasattva. With a particular 100-syllable mantra that's said to be the most potent medicine for purifying negative karma. And that's our tradition. Very strongly we do that. But you can do anything, whatever you know there. If you don't know anything, don't know Vajrasattva, you just visualise Chen raising, like we did this morning, light coming and purifying you. And Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. Good enough. Anything you know. Don't even know a mantra, just visualise light coming from the Buddha purifying you. How fantastic. It's all your mind. Your mind does it. Your mind creates negativity. Your mind's doing this to purify it. It's net with positivity. There's no mystical thing about it. It's your mind. And the fourth step, as Paponka Rinpoche says, the most important, resolve. The determination to change. So you don't lie to yourself, as Lama Zopa says. You give yourself a genuine, serious timeline. You don't say, I'll never get bad-mouthed Jane again, if you've really got a habit to do it. But you be sincere in your effort, and you might start with, I will not say one bad word to her tomorrow. You make a really firm decision. And we all know when you make a firm decision, you're likely to be successful. If you sit there feeling sorry for yourself and I hope she forgives me again, you'll never change. Ever, ever, ever. You've got to decide. Everything exists on the tip of the wish. So the vows you can absolutely vow never to do again. You reiterate these every day. This is how you strengthen your vows. And you purify your weakened ones and you strengthen your kept ones. It's just the best practice. And as Lama Yeshe says, you go to bed with a happy mind. So the third step, you visualise when you took refuge, you visualise your guru as Vajrasattva. If you haven't got a guru, don't worry, just think of the Buddha and think of your gurus out. If you want a guru, think you've got a guru out there, sort of they're twiddling their thumbs waiting for you to recognise them. They're out there wanting to help you, dying to help you. So you visualise them and they're manifesting as the Buddha to benefit you above your crown. And then when you do the third step, you visualise the Buddha. There's all different lovely ways of visualising. Nectar coming, driving out all the negativity, disappearing like yucky water into space. And you recite the mantra. There's many variations of this. And once you get the idea, you can do your own way, You don't have to stick to the script. As long as you understand the principles of what you're trying to do. And in fact, in many ways, it's much better not to read some words. You read all the holy words, blah, 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 you just do it kind of mindlessly. Once you know the steps and you understand the meaning of it, you engage in it yourself. It's like you being your own little therapist at the end of the day. It's very meaningful. It's a very sincere, meaningful practice to do. Not just blindly blah, blah, blah like that. It's not enough. You've got to genuinely regret because you know you're sick of suffering. You've got to have genuine compassion because you know they're sick of suffering. You've got to do the mantra, visualising strong, and you've got to make serious decisions. Even if it's going to be for an hour, as Rinpoche says, even for 5 minutes, often I think if you're going to do the practice at night, and I'm going to go to sleep for 8 hours, I can vow, I will not badmouth Jane for 8 hours. And I won't, I'll be fast asleep. And you'll keep it. You wake up in the morning really rejoicing. You can add it to 9 hours, 10 hours, until eventually you can say, I will never badmouth Jane again. Got to be realistic in it. This is how you change. And this gives us optimism and confidence and self-respect. Instead of this garbage dump guilt we have and this hopeless, I'm bad, I'm useless. It's so horribly negative. It's like cruelty to ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, Almost like it's a virtue to think you're a creep. It's really depressing. And this is such a powerful practice, so simple. When you keep it in simple words, Know the meaning of each step. Then you can do more holy ones with more prayers and things in it when you get used to it. You know? But it's you talking to yourself. You being your own best friend. I really mean it sincerely that way. Definitely. Not to do with anybody else. You have your guru there, yeah, they're like the witness, but you're doing the job. So it's got to come from you. We're not used to this because we'd rather have somebody else tell us we're a nice person or get us off the hook, you know. We've got to become our own therapist. It's very important. So that's the purification practice. And Lama Yeshe said, as Lama Yeshe says, now you can go to bed with a happy mind. What a lovely way to finish the day, you know. Clean up your act. Do a bit of weeding. Go to bed. Then you wake up, off you go again. Any questions? That's purification. Any questions?
Yeah. I had a question.
Where? So, where are you? Yes, Sharon.
So when you purify, let's say I lied and I have to purify it. Okay?
So purifying means?
Purifying.
Means?
Doing the
yeah, but purify means in reality, psychologically, what do you think it means?
It will take it away from beginningless time.
No, that's a load of nonsense. Only when you realize emptiness, darling. Who told you that? Where'd you get that from?
That's the way I've kind of understood it. Like when you purify.
Well, but just by saying a mantra, you purify since beginningless time all negativity? What are you talking about? You mean Buddha by now?
My lying. If I purify.
Excuse me, what?
Let's say I lied, okay?
Okay, Sharon, I hear you. I'm asking you to understand the meaning of the word purify. If you think it means that, you're mistaken. So in the most simple sense, what do you think regretting lying, having compassion for those you lied to, doing a little mantra to purify, and vowing to do your best not to lie again? What do you think a simple way of describing that process? What is that process? What are you familiarizing your mind with in that process?
Not to do it again.
No, that's more than that, isn't it? That's the fourth step, isn't it? What's the first one?
Regretting it.
And what does regret mean?
Feeling you wished you didn't do it.
No, that's got nothing to do with it. That's useless thinking. That is not what regret is. That has got zero to do with regret. Regret is recognizing that you did do it, and because you were stupid out of habit and ignorance, and that it's sowing a seed in your mind that will ripen as you're suffering. And you know what? You say to yourself, Sharon, I really don't want more suffering. I'm sick of this. So I regret having done that from the depths of my heart. That's how regret sounds in your words. Can you hear that? Can you hear that? That's just doorway into it. Then what would you do? Next step?
Regret it, then now I've just like lost it.
What's the next step naturally? What would you do? If you've eaten poison, what would you do next?
Wish I hadn't eaten the poison.
No, we just said that. We just said that.
Yeah.
That's called regret. What would you naturally do if someone just points out you've got poison in your dinner? What would you say? What would you say if you discovered you got poison in your dinner? What would you say to yourself?
Oh shit.
That's right. And then what would you do? And then what would you do next? Naturally, what would you do next? Sharon, what would you do?
I'd probably panic.
No, come on. Seriously, what's the practical thing to do? What would you do?
Ask. Look for an antidote.
Look for an antidote. Look for the medicine.
So who would have an antidote? Who would have it?
The doctor.
Who?
If I took poison, the doctor.
Thank you. So the next step is reliance. So you think, whom can I turn to? That's the Buddha here, right? And you take refuge. And then what's the next bit you do under the heading of reliance? Sharon, honey, you've heard this from 37 times from my mouth. You've read it 37 times. How come you asked the question?
I know, I just like panic sometimes when you stop.
I'm not
talking
interested
to me.
in your panic. Don't blame me for your panic. You'd have compassion for the person you lied to. Then what would you do?
Have compassion. Then I wouldn't want to do it again.
No, you've missed the point. The medicine. You take your medicine, dear.
Yeah.
You do your practice. Your Bodhisattva mantra. You're visualizing all this as the medicine. You hear that one. And then you make a decision to change, right? So it's a natural, logical process. And it's gradual, is it not? Is it not gradual, Sharon? If you had to learn the piano, what you're doing is learning to do something you're not used to doing, isn't it? That means you're regretting. It's like you're regretting not knowing how to play piano. So then you're determined to try and change. And then you turn to a teacher. And then you start by playing, you start to change the habit, don't you? So you don't become Bach overnight, do you?
No.
So nor can you purify since beginningless time with one little mantra, can you? It's not realistic, is it?
No.
So it's a gradual process of changing your mind from negative to positive, isn't it? So it's eventually when you get stronger and stronger at it, and better and more and deeper and more realizations, and then you eventually realize emptiness, then you'll purify all of them. It's one step at a time, dear. Do you hear it now? A little
Yes.
bit?
Yes,
Thank you
do.
so much. Who else? What questions? Anybody?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
If I've been doing something wrong and I realize I regret,
At the time or later?
no, later.
Well, how later? 1 year? 100 years? A minute? Because the minute, okay, first of all, the second we think and do and say something, it sort of, the little negative action's not, the seed's not going, wait on, you're going to regret me yet? You're going to regret me? Hey, I want to start growing. No, it starts growing immediately.
Yeah.
So the sooner you catch it, it's not just like if you're driving on the freeway. You've got to drive in the right lane. The second you drive in the wrong lane, you don't notice until you get crashed in a car. You notice then, and then you adjust yourself. So the sooner you catch it, the more likely it is to be able to quickly change it. Because the more you give the time to grow, the harder it is to pull it out.
Okay, but for years doing bad things.
That's right. For centuries, for eons doing bad things, dear.
Yeah.
For countless lives. Billions of lives of animals. Billions of lives of animals harming billions and trillions of sentient beings. And with all these negative seeds in our minds. Then, question?
Sick of suffering.
Who? Oh, yeah, sick of suffering, right?
Yeah.
You
So
have to say what suffering is. What's suffering?
suffering is unsatisfaction, anger.
No, it's not suffering. That's the cause of suffering.
Depression.
No, that's the cause of suffering, dear.
Oh,
They're also suffering, but they're the cause of suffering. So suffering is having people be mean to you, badmouth you, punch you, kick you, rape you, be born as a dog. That's suffering. And then, okay, the second kind of suffering, yes, being caught up in the delusions of believing their happiness.
yeah.
All of this. And then the... yeah.
But my worst conception of myself
It's delusions and it's causing suffering as well, yes.
is, yeah.
But you also don't like being punched in the nose, do you, and harmed and badmouthed by people, is that right?
If
Do you
I-
mind doing that? Do you mind that happening?
No.
Okay, well you must regret the causes of that. What are the causes of people being mean to you?
What is it? So, excuse me.
Huh?
I
What
don't
do you-
understand the question.
Oh no, sorry. Never
So-
mind.
No, my
Go on,
question
just
is.
ask your question. Go on, darling.
No, my question is. So, if I regret, and you say that I feel compassion to myself, and then the antidotes. No,
Yeah, that's
I do
right, yeah.
exactly the
You have
opposite.
compassion for yourself, and have compassion for others, and you take refuge. Then the antidote.
Yeah, I can sing mantras to.
Yeah, like that, yeah.
Yeah, and then resolve to do.
Resolve to change.
Yes,
Make a decision, strong decision.
Yes.
Do the best you can, yeah.
doing all this,
Yeah.
even if it's for years, I
Yeah.
can clean my karma.
You're asking what Sharon's asking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I answered exactly her question, I answered it.
No, really?
Exactly,
sorry.
I answered your question. Exactly, I answered her question. It's all right, darling. I do talk fast, and I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
So that's what I mean, right back to Sharon's question, to my question to her. When the more you understand this natural psychological process of changing your mind, so stop calling it like religion. Think of like again, like I have to use the example, like you're learning something, or like you're growing a garden. You first have to acknowledge there's a weed there in your garden, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear that?
Yeah.
You have to recognise you're a gardener, you want a lovely garden. So you've got to recognise there's a weed there. And you've got to regret, what an idiot for me to let that weed grow. Because look at it, it's going to strangle my nice flowers. So you first regret that there's a weed there because you planted it, right? Can you see that thought?
Yeah.
You look a bit confused.
Yeah, but
Sweetheart, you've got to listen to me.
Oh, sorry.
Well, you don't have to really, but... Well, I'm trying to give you... We're so talking this weird, wacko way when it's called religion. And just like her ridiculous questions. She's asked me all the time these ridiculous questions. For years. These ridiculous religious questions. You're asking a religious... Will we
But my
purify
first time is.
Okay, I know. I know, that's good. Thank you for asking me. Very good. Listen, honey, let me answer it in a simple way as an ordinary example, and that'll answer your question. Okay, forgive me. You decide you're going to become a gardener. You want a lovely garden full of flowers and veggies, yeah? That's a good result, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay. The first thing you have to do is look, and then look at what's there, don't you? And you've got to notice lots of weeds. You know there's lots of weeds in the garden? Weeds. A weed. You know what a weed is?
No.
Tell a girl. What language you speak?
Français?
Uy, no sabes.
Es
No,
una
she's-
planta que no quieres en tu huerta.
Uh-huh, yes, yes,
Got
yes, yes.
Thank you. You see all the weeds, and you go, what an idiot. I let my garden grow all these ridiculous weeds. That's the analogy for negative imprints in the mind, negative actions, that you regret them. What a fool I was to let these weeds grow.
Yeah,
Look at my garden, isn't it? It's make a mess. That's called regret.
yes.
Then the next step is, whom can I turn to? Where's the gardener I can use to advise me what to do? That's you turn to the Buddha, who's the doctor. Then you have, forget the compassion one, okay? The next step is you now apply the antidote. You've got to pull out the weeds, put in the business that breaks the weeds out. And the more weeds you can pull out, the better, isn't it? Mm. And then the fourth step is you vow to make sure you don't grow more weeds.
Mm-hmm.
That's purification. So it doesn't all magically come overnight, does it? You do it gradually. And then the more weeds you pull out, the more flowers you can grow, the more veggies, and slowly, slowly you get a magnificent garden. One step at a time. It's very organic and natural. You're doing that with your mind. Does that make sense? A little bit. Do you
Yes.
think?
The guilt, I don't...
What do you mean, the guilt?
To feel guilty because all the past, even if I'm purification, what can I do with the guilt?
What's guilt for you?
To feel so bad because...
Why do you feel bad? What do you mean feel bad?
Well, because being part of causing suffering to me and to others.
That's right. That's right. So then, what are you going to do with it?
I have to live with it.
No, you don't. You regret. You just.
But I'm asking serious.
I know you are, darling, and I'm answering you seriously. It's really good questions you're asking. Okay. Guilt is saying, oh my God, all this harm I've done in the past and I'm a really bad person. That's what you mean by guilt. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Would you agree that's how you feel? I'm a bad person. I did all this harm. Yeah?
Yeah.
And then your answer was, I have to live with it. So you're looking at the weeds and you're going, I'm such a bad person. I can't believe I grew all these weeds. And what am I going to do with it? I'm going to have to live with it. That would be very depressing, wouldn't it? If you didn't have a method to pull out the weeds, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But here we're talking, the sowing of the weeds is simply negative imprints in your mind. Habits. Negative habits in your mind. That's all. Tendencies. So they're not permanent. You can actually change them. So this attitude of regret is a more wholesome attitude. It says, what an idiot. I did all these things. Yes, I've been born since the beginning of time. I've been animals, is what Buddha says, Or you just take this life as enough, one step at a time. And you recognize you've done things wrong. So you become more like this attitude is like adult, grown up. Not like a child. Guilt is the voice of a child, an innocent victim, and you feel sorry for yourself and you beat yourself up, and it is useless. Not useful at all. It's seeing all the weeds and saying, I'm a bad person, and you go back home and you get depressed about your weeds. And you go tomorrow and you see more weeds, and you get more depressed. It's completely useless. You agree with that?
Yes.
So you have to be proactive. That means you can think, well, my God, maybe there's a method I can have to change this. So I've got to go to find a decent gardener. I've got to find a decent doctor. So in this context, the Buddha is our doctor, because he is the one, for those who choose to be Buddhist, are choosing Buddha's methods to use to help pull out the weeds. Because the Buddha's view is there's no weed we can't pull out. There's no negative tendency we can't change, because it's all the mind. It's not concrete. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So regret is a wholesome attitude of confidence that owns responsibility, that you've been a lousy gardener. So then you go, what can I do about it? Not, oh, I just live with it. So here we use the idea of the Buddha. In this context, we turn to the Buddha to rely upon, like a doctor, like the gardener, whose methods we will then employ to change our garden, to change our mind.
Yeah. So again, the intention that you were talking about, the intention to change and not to do it anymore. With that, I can live without guilt, maybe.
That's the first step, yeah. You first acknowledge that they're your weeds, it's your anger, it's your negativity. You must have killed, lied, cheated, bad-mouthed. Just think this life first. Don't get carried away with too many animals. It might get depressing. Just think of the naughty things you've done in this life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you'd be grown up about it. You know what? I did do that. I am ignorant. I did, I really regret it, because I don't want those seeds that I planted when I did those actions to grow in the future as my suffering. I don't want more suffering. You've got to say that. That gives you courage. It was like kindness towards yourself. Because you're harming yourself when you do things to harm others. That's the first step. And that's called regret. And it's very wholesome. It's very self-respectful. And it's confident.
Yeah.
Do you understand, darling?
Yeah.
Because you're sick of suffering. And you know you are. We know we're sick of suffering. Do you understand? Sick of suffering.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you think, whom can I turn to? The gardener. Let me get some decent methods here so I can get some confidence and start to find the way to pull out my weeds and grow a beautiful garden. Then you get confident. And then you do a little practice, which is like pulling out the weeds. And we call the particular practice we all do, like I'm talking here, recitation of a mantra. You can visualize light coming from the Buddha, anything you like, to imagine purifying. It's it makes you confident. The fourth step is determination to change. And you be realistic with yourself. Just a minute. You be realistic. You decide, I will do this and that, and I won't do this and this. You give yourself a timeline. And then you relax and go to bed with a happy mind. You just did a bit of gardening. You get up next day, same thing. One step at a time. Does that make sense now, a little bit?
Thank you.
All right, sweetheart. Yes.
So I'm gardening, and I'm constantly gardening because I've got
Plenty of weeds and plenty of stuff.
I got a lot of work.
That's
to
right,
do.
exactly. We
I
all
let
have.
it go,
Yes, that's
and,
right.
I got to bring it back to life.
That's right.
At the same time, I'm trying to get karma and emptiness in my brain together. At the same time, am I trying to investigate and understand my sense of self so that those two things converge? And
Okay, I understand. Exactly. So this practice is a straightforward in the conventional truth part of tea. It's just as you take you just look at a conventional sense. A negative action is this and a positive action is that. I regret the negative, I rejoice in the positive. It's a simple conventional truth. But you can add to it once you know more about emptiness. And then they have this very nice little practice called the 3 circles. So at the end, Rinpoche would get us to then think that I, who created the negative action, is empty of existing from its own side. And the creating of the negative action is also empty of existing from its own side. And the action itself, the negative karma itself, is also empty of existing from its own side. So in the beginning, we don't get this because this sounds like weird nihilistic talk. But the more we understand that a negative action is simply a dependent arising like anything else. So, let me give the example back to the killing of the mouse. That discussion I had, I forget who had what kind of mouse, but that discussion, if we look at what a negative action is, a negative action, like a flower, like a person, like a microphone, like a cup, is a phenomenon that does exist, okay? It's got a few words rather than just a noun. But creating negative karma is an action, would you agree? Mm-hmm. Well, it's also a dependent arising. So let's look at that, which means it's empty too. So let's look at how that is logically so. So this is what should give us some encouragement that it's not set in stone. So that example of the mouse, I have the mouse and I kill it with the usual motivation, which is anger. And that's, Buddha says, that's what makes it negative when I do it. The mouse certainly suffers, there's no question, but what makes it negative when I do it, this is the proof that it's empty of inherent existence. What makes it negative when I do it is my wish to harm the mouse. But you kill the mouse out of compassion. You really think killing it will help it. Many people do. And your genuine wish is to help the mouse. Do you agree with that? Mm-hmm. And you're full of compassion. And you're sad. And you really want to help the mouse and you kill it. Well, look at it. The 4 points there. The first one, there is an object there. Same for you, same for me. Tick the boxes. A living mouse. Second, intention, the broad heading. For you, 2A, recognition, that is the mouse I'm going to kill. Same for me, that is the mouse I'm going to kill. 2B, intention, I will kill that mouse. For you, I will kill that mouse. 2C, my motivation, I want to harm the mother. Yours, oh, poor little mouse. That's the one piece that's different. The third one, you kill the mouse. I kill the mouse. Fourth one, the mouse dies and I rejoice. It dies and you rejoice. So it's exactly, it's like a little building, and it's got these several bricks in it. They both look identical. Mm-hmm. But you pull out my anger brick and you put in a compassion brick, the whole thing changes. It's a different action. This proves a negative action is also dependent arising in dependence upon its parts and the causes and conditions. Therefore, it too is empty of being an inherently negative action. That's the point.
Yeah.
And to make sure, when we hear that negative karma is empty, and thinking, oh, that's great, there's no negative karma, phew. No, that's nihilism. To make sure we don't go there, we realize that, this is the point, that Buddha says that everything exists, can exist, only because it's empty of inherently existing. So things exist because they're empty. If something were not empty of inherent existence, if something were not empty of being merely labelled, if something were not empty of causes and conditions or parts, if something were independent of those things, Buddha says it simply can't exist. He says it's not a possibility. No such thing can exist. It's impossible, he says. So the I, he says, we believe in, is an impossibility. This is the point to get. We've made up a nonsense. No wonder we suffer. No wonder we bash our heads against brick walls. The I we think is there. The negative action we think we did. The positive action we think we did. They don't have an inherent nature set in stone as innately good, innately bad. That's the fundamentalist view, and we're all fundamentalists, basically. Because it's opposite to emptiness. Opposite to dependent arising. So when we understand emptiness and dependent arising properly, we will have perfect confidence in the law of karma, not the opposite. Because everything does count. Everything is important. Everything does exist. It functions. So the negative action, the one of killing the mouse based on delusion, it is a negative action conventionally, but not from its own side. Not from its own side negative. Not in and of itself negative. It's negative because of the delusion that causes me to do it. That's what makes it negative. So it's a dependent arising. You change the motivation, you change everything. You don't do this, you don't do that, everything's different. This is not saying you should go around killing with compassion. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. Don't misunderstand me. It's seeing the power of that one little brick that you change in that edifice called a negative action.
Even if my compassion is a delusion?
If it is delusion and not compassion, then indeed it's not compassion.
But killing a mouse
No, that's different.
is not necessarily compassionate.
No, that's not the point.
Okay.
That's not the discussion. Compassion is your motivation, your wish to help.
Okay.
So look, let's go to the next step. Of course it's not a sensible action because you don't have any wisdom. And the wisdom is seeing the mind of that mouse and having confidence that it's, about its karma. So there's no wisdom. And the fact is, even, let's say my mouse, let's say I hate my mouse. I want to, torture it. I create heavy negative karma. But let's say I live next door to you and you're a good little Buddhist and that my little mouse as it's dying a terrible death hears the Buddhism, the mantras of the Buddha and the Buddha grabs it and it gets a really decent human rebirth. But your little mouse, whom you're so trying to help, it's suffering, the poor thing. You just stood on it and now you kind of bash it to death. It's completely freaking out and it'll go straight to the hell realms. So even though your mouse goes to the hell realms, you still meant well. But that's why, as Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. You need compassion. You need wisdom. So but compassion's better than nothing, but don't think it helps the mouse. It only helps you. That's the point about compassion. You've got to have wisdom as well. Do you see?
Yeah.
Any questions? Can't be 9:30. Oh, it's 8:26. Here it goes. Any questions, people? You had a question. Someone
Jane.
here. Yes, where? Jane.
I don't have a question, but I answered
Go on,
a
say
question.
your point. You're thinking.
Just going back to Paola's
Yeah.
question,
Yeah.
I think, here it talks about, and you said it, that with regret, saying, I did this in the past, and what can I do about it,
Mm.
and recognizing that suffering,
Yeah.
causes suffering to
Yes,
yourself
yes,
and others.
yes.
But that I think for
No, at the moment I think it's just yourself.
for you, okay, for
It's like
yourself.
renunciation.
Right.
Compassion is the next one. I mean, being strict about it. It's like the renunciation level. Then when you have compassion, I think you regret for others. Anyway, never mind. Go on.
But I think for some people who have a real tendency to feel
Guilt.
guilty,
Yes. Yes.
I think I wonder what you think about this. Whether you
Yeah.
think the idea of being kind to yourself and forgiving yourself, and not having that as a sort of a step. Because if you're all involved in that, I don't know that just going to what can I do about it necessarily can
Really?
sort of, yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I haven't thought of that because it seems okay.
Because if
I
it
know.
were someone else, if it were a friend of yours who had done it, you
Mm.
wouldn't say, "Oh, you stupid idiot! How could you do that? I can't believe you did that." You wouldn't say that to them over and over again, right?
But you wouldn't. But you're not saying that to yourself either. If you do, then that sounds like guilt to me.
Yeah, but exactly. But that's what I'm saying. That's what she's talking about.
Yeah, which is guilt.
Right. So how do you get?
I think that's the distinction that His Holiness made. I don't know. Maybe I didn't say it well, but His Holiness says that guilt is the one that says I did those bad things, and then concludes automatically and spontaneously, and this is what we truly do. Then I'm a bad person. That's the sound of guilt.
I agree, and what I'm saying.
I
is
know that you have to say I forgive myself, but I mean, okay, those words I never thought of those words. I mean, that works for somebody. Go for it, of course. But I mean, I wonder what it means though. Forgive yourself. How would that sound to you? How would that? Can some of it for whom that works? How does it? Tell me about that. Go on.
I kind of was going on the same length.
So,
as
how does it?
but
Have you got an answer to my question?
Kind of.
What's your answer to the
It's
question?
kind of like seeing the weeds not just as weeds, but seeing them as they can be good.
Okay, no, that's not what's been discussing here.
Well,
We're not
it's
discussing that here.
the-
No, that's really getting it thrown off here. That's not. We're not. That's tantra.
No,
That's way. It is. That view is not what we're talking
I'm
here.
sorry.
So, can someone
didn't
tell
know
me?
it.
Forgive me.
Yeah,
Can
you
someone
say-
tell me? What does I forgive myself? I'd like to analyse it. I'm not being sarcastic. I really want to know if it really is a genuine psychological step that will
Yeah,
really help
it
you.
means you say, okay, I'm gonna
Yeah, but
let
what-
it go. I'm gonna
okay,
stop
no.
torturing myself. I'm gonna let it go, and now I'm not gonna beat myself up about it. I'm gonna do something about it. But you have to.
Well, that seems what's implied by what His Holiness says. But
Right.
never mind. We need that. Maybe that missing step. Go on. Tell me what you're saying. Maybe that's a good point. I haven't thought of it. Go on.
I was carrying a lot of guilt about the way I raised my children. I was terribly ignorant at the time. And the way I was able to forgive myself for it was with the new knowledge that I have and with the changes that I've been able to make in myself, I said to myself, would I do the same thing today? And when I was able to say no to that with a wholehearted understanding that I truly had changed, I would never do that. I've got 7 grandchildren that I could abuse if I was still in that mindset. That was what.
So
allowed
tell me. Now wait a minute. So tell me the bit in there that helps you move towards what can I do to change.
Would I do the same thing today? It's
But
asking-
every action we were going to regret by definition would be that, wouldn't it? I hear. I'm just debating. I'm just listening.
Sure.
So I regret an abortion I had. I think one of the mistakes. Okay, you're not saying it. You're not saying it, but something I've heard regularly is, but why should I regret it? I couldn't have done any better then. So you feel like you sort of, even then, by saying you regret it, you're beating yourself up for having done it. But I didn't, so in other words, when I was 23, and I knew absolutely I did not want the end result. I never thought it was a being inside me. I knew I didn't want the little kicking baby at the end. I could visualize that and didn't want it.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an abortion.
Sure.
So there's no, but I remember then I didn't think of it as a mind, I didn't think of consciousness, I didn't think of it as a being, I just knew I didn't want this end result.
Mm-hmm.
So then of course I wouldn't do it now. But then, okay, everyone's different, of course. I never thought of the forgiveness one. I just think that's, I don't know. If for me the words, and maybe we are all different, so whatever words work for your mind, please say them. Because the point is, what I'm saying about the gardening, the hopelessness of the view, I'm a bad person, look at this disgusting garden. When you say, oh, look at this hopeless garden, this garden's a mess, this garden's a wreck, it's a disaster, I'm a lousy gardener, this is hopeless. What that's saying is, you can do nothing, you're paralysed. This is overwhelming me, this is too much, I can't bear this. This is why people live in denial, that's why you beat yourself up, this is all too much to bear, like she said. It's so true. That is guilt. But then it seems to me, the one that His Holiness says, which is not contradicting what Jane said, which is just a little extra step towards it, It's true. The hardest part is owning that this is my garden, because the ego desperately wants to throw it off. We either turn against ourselves bitterly, or we blame somebody else, or we live in denial because we find it unbearable. So whatever method we can use to have the courage to own this is my garden. And yes, true, I was a fool. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand I was losing all those weeds. I didn't know, at the time, I didn't know I was killing a human being. It's true, you've got to speak like, and that's like forgiveness. It's true what you're saying. It is saying, it's okay, I didn't know what I was doing. But that's really the reason also, the Buddha says, because we're out of ignorance we harm people. So you acknowledge, I didn't know what I was doing. That's exactly true. You didn't, and that already softens it, which is like you're saying, forgiving yourself, because I didn't know what I was doing then. So then, of course, and then the one I regret is simply, based on this view of karma, which every millisecond it says that everything you think and do and say stays in the mind and is chatting away, is growing in there. So the regretting one is also then, I do not want these seeds to ripen as my future suffering. And you've got to really say that with kindness to yourself. Like if you keep eating bad food, the point where you finally start to change is actually, you don't beat yourself up, I'm fat and ugly. You realize you're sick of the suffering. It's a really powerful moment. It's a kindness to yourself. It's your wake-up call. I'm sick of this suffering. I'm going to change. That's, when you have so many bad relationships and you see your same old fault yet again, it's a certain point you get to where you realize I'm fed to the teeth with these patterns. I have to change. That's what people who pick themselves up. My friends in prison, one of their commonest things was, this is my wake-up call. So that's that has to happen, and that's a real kindness towards ourselves. It's not, you would never say that, it's just yet again beating yourself up. So forgiveness is probably the word that is meaningful to people. For sure it's that. But it's owning it, responsibility. It's my garden, I grew it, I'm an idiot, look at me, but kindly, what a fool. But the real one is, you can't just say I'm a fool for having done it, it's all past, but remember that those seeds will ripen as you're being killed, you're being raped, you're being aborted, you're being murdered, which sounds, if you relate to the view of karma, can be very powerful. And I don't want that suffering, or even the suffering of the same old bad biting, bad mouthing my friend. Sick of the rubbish, even that's enough to start. And know that you're sick of it and want to, and that gives you the courage then to then, if you can, have compassion for those you harm, and then do the practice, and then make some decisions to change. So it's a real psychological process. That's why pretending to do it, just reading holy words, doesn't touch anything. Makes sense, doesn't it? You've got to engage in it yourself, properly. It's a powerful practice for this psychological reason. Yes, Dave.
I heard you speaking on the same exact subject another time, and I wish I could remember exactly how you put it, but the thing that stuck out to me that finally made me get it was that regret had intention involved in it going forward.
Yes.
That
Absolutely.
was the part that
I see what you're saying.
separated it
No, that's the one. Yes, exactly. What can I do? What can I do? Like eating the bad food. When you eat poison food, there's such a sense of urgency to do something about it. You can't just sit there wallowing in your misery and your self-pity, or even forgiving yourself. No bloody time to forgive yourself. Quick, where's the doctor? That's the attitude. And that's no one's going to sit there feeling guilty if you've eaten poison. Nobody would be stupid enough to go on about their bad and how hopeless and I forgive myself. Please, the point is, Dave's point, get on and do something about it before it ripens as suffering. That's the one, the sense of urgency, because that's recognizing that everything we think and do and say will bring consequences to me, and I'm up to here with suffering. That's the proactive point. That's the point, Dave. Yes, that's right. Do you understand?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. That's helpful. Anybody else? Yes, Tommy.
Thank you. I'm Kathy, by the way.
Kathy, yes.
I guess I look at when, like the forgiveness question, to me it's not unlike just being compassionate towards
Yes,
yourself.
that's right. Another way of saying it. It's another way of saying it. Compassion for yourself and forgiving yourself is the same. It's
right,
a softness.
so you're going through the same steps,
Yeah, that's
but
right.
you're being compassionate
That's
to your
right.
being for your wrong action, and allowing that to happen to go through the process, and then when you go through the purification,
Well,
the gunk comes out.
yeah, but the crucial point about compassion for yourself has to act, where's the medicine?
Well,
Quick.
yes.
Where's the antidote? Quick. I don't want the suffering. It's a sense of urgency. Dave's point is such a perfect one. You've got to, not just this, if it is just guilt, hang on, if it is just this guilt, I'm a bad person, I'm weighed down, weighed so heavy, we're not getting the point. Because it's going to ripen. as you're suffering, like that sense of urgency you get with poison. There's no time for kind of wallowing in anything there. I mean, whatever. It's a really good point. But go on.
Yeah,
It's like compassion
I
for
was
yourself.
just making the comparison
Yes, it's
between
true.
the forgiveness and
Totally.
compassion.
It is compassion for
because
yourself. That's exactly right.
interchangeable.
That's right. No, it is. They don't talk like that, the Buddhists. That's not the way they talk. But we get that point. So that's why renunciation, which sounds very forbidding to us, is really this, what we're just talking here. Recognizing you've caused yourself suffering, you've eaten all this poison food for years and years, and you really do not want further suffering. You don't want to get that cancer. You don't want to get that bellyache, you know. That's compassion for yourself. And that demands you want to change for your own sake. And then you can afford to have compassion for others. But you've got to have it for yourself first. This is what renunciation is, you know. Many people say I have compassion for others, but I don't have any for myself. That means it's all unbalanced. It's not really based on something reasonable. And the fact is, again, let's say it now, I was going to talk about it more tomorrow. It's honest that all the teachings say, the way the teachings are structured, you know, compassion is the university wing. The compassion wing is university. Knowing about your mind and the delusions is high school. Controlling your body and speech is junior school, and that's where karma fits. So, having renunciation, which is junior school and high school, you're sick of the negative actions you do with your body and speech, junior school, based upon the delusions, which is high school. So the two of these together, recognizing one, I am sick of suffering, and you know what suffering is. It's first noble truth. And then two, the point is, the penny drops when you now finally realize the causes of suffering. Your negative karma and your delusions. This is what makes renunciation. The recognition you're suffering and you're sick of it, and finally you've found the reason why. Now you know why, which implies now I must do something about it. Finally I know why I've got that bellyache. Now I can give it up. So, when you've got that for yourself, now you have a sound basis for valid compassion for other sentient beings. Which means you see that one, same point, you see in this case their suffering. And that means all the victims and the oppressors, the pedophiles, the terrorists, the ex-husbands, who are causing the suffering. Because you realize that they are all suffering in the same boat as you, and you know now, number two, why they are doing this and why they are suffering. Because of their karma and their delusions. So once you got that for you, it's easy to have it for others. And until we have it for ourselves, we can't properly have it for others. Because the Buddhist view of compassion is based on understanding karma. That everybody creates their own suffering. Are we communicating here? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions? At 8:30, 8:40? Mm-hmm. Nothing else?
Is it kind of like that by not acknowledging your own karma, like your own garden, and not allowing that compassion to happen, because you're blocked there, you can't really have compassion for others?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very common, isn't it? I just think about it. It's really common. There are some people, and I'm not putting them down, their compassion is very strong for others. They see the world, their heart breaks, they try to rush out to help people. But you say to them, oh no, I'm not suffering. And they beat themselves up, they put themselves down. It's very common, not uncommon. So all Buddha's saying is that compassion is very limited, because it's usually only for the innocent victims, for the little animals. And what's fascinating to me, you think about it, we only have compassion for the animals that human beings harm. Because you know why? Because we can't wait to blame somebody. Because our compassion now is based on blame. Mm-hmm. We love to, the more that little child is innocent and gets, beaten by the parent, the more angry we become with the parent. But we never have compassion when we see, if you see two wild animals on a television show ripping each other to death, you call it nature. You bring the children in to look. It's called education. But you get your poodle ripping the guts out of your Persian cat. Excuse me, you'll be hysterical. Or you get some person beat up your Persian cat. You'll send him to jail. Why? Because we love to blame somebody. Because we're attached, mostly because we are attached to our pussy cat and our doggy woggy. We're not attached to the lion and the buffalo, And we just call it nature. We don't even notice they're suffering. We don't even call it suffering. I mean, it's really fascinating, you've got to admit. You see this buffalo being ripped alive. I mean, this particular television show, it struck me, you know. This mummy lion, very skillful, gets the buffalo down on the ground by the throat and rips its guts out. And the babies come along and they sit there leisurely eating hot entrails while the buffalo's dying and screaming agony. And we go, oh, isn't this interesting? This is nature. You must admit it's a little bit delusional. Do you not think?
Yes.
Because we're not attached to them. We have all these stories, you know. It's nature, it's natural, blah, 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 you know. We don't have compassion for them. We only have compassion for the ones that humans harm. Or the ones we're attached to, you know. It's kind of interesting. Yes, darling.
Well, what about, let's say, like, you know, you're teaching right now, and we're learning these things, and it's just like the mom was teaching the, let's say, a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way of their life.
That's right. It is indeed their
So-
life, yes.
So therefore, their perception is different than ours.
What, darling? They what?
Their perception is different than ours. So
Yes, of course
how
it is. That's why they harm each other, because they don't realise they're harming themselves and each other, because they're ignorant.
So
Buddha
how
says.
do they see a different perception?
They can't. They're hopeless, not as animals. Nothing they can do. Nothing. Zero. They're idiots. They can't do anything. Their nature is
What
so
about,
strong.
like, cats and dogs, and how we like
What
kind
about
of
them?
train them and like.
Well, a little bit, but you know, you only go so far. Listen, honey child, put some nice humans together and we're prepared to behave nicely. But bring a couple of terrorists in here and check how you behave. I mean, even a human. We're going to lose the plot and freak out, get depressed, need counselling, have mental breakdowns, have ADID or whatever, all these diseases, because we can't cope. So an animal, forget it. Your little dog, that's why the least thing you can do for your dog or your cat is prevent it from killing. So at least it stops creating negative karma. But it can't create any virtue. It can't do anything. Its mind is thick as a post. It's stupid. It's riddled in ignorance. So the best you can do is you play mantras and so put imprints of the Buddha in its mind. That's the only way to help it. Feed it and be nice to it, but that's just using up its merit. Got to put some decent imprints in its mind, you know. That's the Buddha's view. The lions and the tigers, what can they do? Nothing. They're locked into suffering. Leopard can't change its spots. Have you noticed that lions, if they will listen to your advice, that buffaloes don't like being ripped out for breakfast? I don't think so.
Well, there's a man that went to, I want to say Africa. I can't remember where exactly, but he.
Speak loud, I can't hear you.
He became like friends with the lions there.
And so what
And
happened? Then?
He went back years
Yeah,
later,
then.
and he met the lions again, and they came up to him as
So
if he
then,
was
then,
family.
I'm very happy. Then,
But,
then,
I mean, like,
then what happened? What are you
Can
telling me?
they-
The lion
I
can suddenly
mean, can they-
have compassion and realise emptiness and be kind to the buffalo and ask it to forgive it and do purification?
Why
Can it do
skip
that?
them?
I'm asking you, can it do all that?
I feel like if they're able to notice that at some point.
Honey, they're
they-
sentient beings with feelings. We know that. That's not being denied here. I'm just saying they can only access their non-virtue. They can't access their virtue, which is meaning kind and compassion and wise and helpful and interdependence. That's not a characteristic of a lion's mind. They're very intuitive, they're very strong, they're very clever, they have they can have some empathy, a little bit. They recognise they're not stupid.
Because they see him as family. You mean?
What?
Because basically they see him as family.
I don't know about that part. That's your words. I've no idea. But if you take Buddha's model of the mind, okay, let's look at Buddha's model of the mind again, which we've been talking about today. You've got 3 categories of states of mind. We all have, all sentient beings. In the hells to the heavens. In samsara, this is the model that refers to all sentient beings. There are 3 categories of states of mind. Those that are called negative, which are rooted in ego grasping, which is the sense of I, that then causes attachment, which causes anger, which causes arrogance and pride, and therefore harming others to get what we want. That's called delusions. Have you noticed humans have some of those? Good. Now you've got virtues. Compassion, empathy, love, intelligence, wisdom, and that's our saving grace. And humans have those if we're lucky. Then you've got the 3rd category, which are attention, intention, recognition, all these mechanical parts of your mind, concentration, all these things. Lions have plenty of those. Eagles have them amazingly. They see a thing from up there, they're 1,000 feet away, they'll come down, boom! They've got incredible focus, incredible intention, incredible attention. But they're driven only by delusions. There's not an atom of virtue, which means empathy and kindness and intelligence and an ability to change their minds in a way to bring empathy and compassion and stop creating negative actions. Animals can't do that. All the bugs, all the mosquitoes, all the little worms in the ground having millions of babies, addicted to sex, all the monkeys who, like some monkeys that come out of their mummy's womb, they turn around and they F-U-C-K her mother, the father, the grandpa, the grandma until they die. They're addicted to sex. Animals are very suffering beings. They've lost the plot, baby. They can't access their virtuous states of mind. They've got trillions of virtuous states of mind. They've got Buddha nature, but it's like buried under a forest of their delusions. And delusions are what cause their intense suffering, and they also are what we share, which cause our suffering. But at least we have the saving grace of access to our virtues. And if we're fortunate, and not many humans do it, we can use those, and that's what's hard work. Animals can't access those. But I'm just talking Buddha's view here. You can decide it's wrong. It's up to you. I'm just telling you Buddha's view. Are we communicating a bit?
How can it be delusion on the part of an animal? Because it seems to me that most of the suffering that they cause is instinctual. Hunger, procreation.
Well, look at her. Excuse me. What's different from us?
Pardon
It's the
me?
same as us. Why do you think you want to have sex, sleep, food, as you call? Well, they're the same things. Of course they're delusions. They're all driven by attachment. And they're so instinctual because we've practiced them for thousands of lives. We've got them down to perfection. That's why they're instinctual. They're second nature, but they're delusions, darling. They're driving us. That's why most of us, they say, the Buddhist teachings say 99% of all humans on this earth right now, when they die, will go to the lower realms. Not just the Hitlers. Not just the Hitlers. This is showing the depth, the subtlety, the depth of the suffering of the states of mind that we in our culture consider normal. So it's a bit of a shock to hear these kind of things. And it's hard not to be fundamentalist about it when you hear it. All it's doing is showing the depth of the suffering of ordinary lives, ordinary people, that we think is normal. Even having these bodies look like a bunch of apes is because of delusions, because of attachment from past lives. It's a very, very, very different view. You know, do you understand what I'm saying?
So then would the idea be...
Can't hear you, darling.
Would it be an idea to not procreate? Like, never anyone? Is that like an idea? Like,
How will that help? Whom will that help?
That's what I'm asking.
But I'm asking you, whom will it help?
Well...
I mean, whom would it help? If you want babies...
Depends. It would depend on...
Well, if you're a human being and you want a baby, then it's an opportunity for someone to get a human birth. Very kind of you, isn't it? You prevent them from getting it. That's okay. You don't have to have babies. But what good does it do? They're going to get a birth somewhere. If not enough humans around, they're going to...
Does that not contradict the idea then?
Huh?
Does that not contradict...
What idea?
The idea of having sex.
What idea of having sex?
I mean, like, is that, like...
Honey, we're all in samsara. We're all in a realm of nightmare where we do have sex.
Right.
So given that's the only entry into a womb is via you sticking a thing in someone else or whatever the other way around. That's the only method.
Would be the intent of
I beg your pardon?
I mean, would that mean that it would be the intent?
What intent? Who?
Like when you have sex,
when you decide to have sex and you want a baby, right?
I don't know. Yeah.
You want a baby, so
Sure.
therefore you decide you get a boy. Unless you have another kind, get somebody buy someone's sperm if you like. You can do that if you like. You don't have to have sex, dear. You can bypass it by sticking it up your thing and have it. You know, a friend of mine is a lesbian, wanted a baby. She got a gay boy to squirt some stuff into a bottle. She squirted it up and she had a baby. Quick and sharp, easy, no sex involved, no puffing and panting. Very sensible. You don't need sex to have a baby now. These days, it's very clever. So what's your point? What's your point?
I guess the point is that like you're talking about the attachment to sex.
That's right. We're all driven by it. That's exactly right. Addiction to sex, sexual attachment. Yeah, that's right.
So to not have the addiction, but
Yeah.
to have the idea is an okay thing.
What your language is so strange. You're such a hippie, new age sort of the idea and the blah, blah, blah. Use nouns and verbs, would you? Let's have a proper sentence. I can't understand you. She's a really good cook, though.
That's how I talk.
I noticed. Be precise.
Precision.
Yeah, precision. If you clear with your
I
question,
guess
say it.
The idea
What's your
is-
no?
the
You keep saying
question-
the idea.
the
What's your question?
The question is.
Thank you.
For Buddhism.
For Buddhism,
Is the idea.
is the goal,
Can,
is the aim, is the,
the
goal.
goal
Yes.
to not
Uh huh.
not create karma, not to have Zach's
Yeah, the best way to practice Buddhism, honey, is to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, become a nun, get some concentration, go to the mountains and get realizations and give up samsara. Of course it is.
But what if everybody did that?
Well,
Then they wouldn't
fantastic. Cut samsara out. Well done, girl.
So then where does it go from there? That's what I'm
Oh,
wondering.
God almighty, girl, you shut up. You just keep coming up with new questions. Whenever I say another fancy la-di-da question.
But then that's how you get answers.
No, your questions are ridiculous. Honey, just listen to the teachings, read it and think about it, and gradually the answers will come, all right?
Okay.
If I were more patient, I'd give you more answers, but I can't. It's 11 o'clock or something. No, it's not. The strange clock's gone nuts. Because someone fix it? It's gone. I think I should calm down and go to bed. What do you think? Any questions? Good. Go, Jane.
I have two questions.
Yes.
Actually. Well, I have one question and one comment. The
Yes.
question is, I understand what you said about animals and they're creating negative karma and how virtually impossible it is for them to create positive karma on their own.
Sure.
But wouldn't you think? Let's say there are certain stories about. Like, the dog that saved the drowning
That's right.
boy,
Exactly.
that kind of thing.
Wonderful stories like this. Yes,
so,
of course.
So in that regard, I would say that is positive karma.
No, there has to
You
be
do?
something. There's got to be something there. Those kind of stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course there is.
Okay.
There's some kind of imprints there. But
Right.
we have to accept that it's there's some. I mean, especially the animals that have connection with domestic animals that are around
Right.
humans,
Yeah, right.
who aren't wild.
And even those, I know what she's talking about, those lions. They had the lion
Yes.
since it was a cub.
Yes.
And then for, I don't know, 2 years or
Yes.
whatever, and then they let it free in
Yes.
Africa, and then
Yes.
they went back, and the lion came and ran
Yes.
up to them and kissed
Sure.
them, and it was
No,
incredible.
that was yeah.
So that's a sweet. That's like a dog.
Well, I know,
in
but
a
that's
way,
it's Jane. It's attachment, darling.
Yeah, no, I know that.
It's not
I'm
virtue.
not saying that's. I agree with you. I'm not saying that is
Virtue.
positive. No, I'm
No,
not saying that.
but
But I
it's nice
think
when
it's not that. It's not. I don't think what you're saying is that animals are not capable of, which is I think what you were suggesting, that animals are not capable of being, of not being horrible, basically, of being sweet.
No, I mean sweet. That we have to analyse sweet, isn't it?
Yeah,
I know
okay.
this point, of course.
But
I mean, of course, it's called attachment, and there's recognition. There's something affection there. There's some
Yeah,
affection
right, that's
because of the
right.
connection. I do hear that. But in general, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
I understand.
I agree with you.
In general, the point is, I'm not being very nuanced. It's true. I'm sounding a bit
Okay,
dramatic.
I want to
sometimes.
say one other thing
Go,
about
come on, say it.
animals, which
Yes.
I mean maybe this is just
Yep.
from my
Okay, go
point
on.
of view, but
Yep.
I understand what you're saying, that we look at nature and we think animals ripping each other apart, and some people think, oh God, that's just nature. But I think that there are people. I mean, I'm one of them. Who, when I see animals suffering, I don't feel bad about it, or I don't feel it doesn't upset me because I want to blame someone.
Sure.
It just I find it
Because you
unbearable.
have compassion. Any animals, you mean?
Yeah, any
Well, that's
animal.
unusual, though. I mean, I'm just being, again, a very sweeping statement.
Yeah.
But, like, for example, I remember Rinpoche's, or like when it comes to, say, anyway, in general, though, it seems human compassion is for all the chickens that get killed by the humans and all the bulls that get killed by the humans and the ones used for food. They're the ones we have real compassion for. The animal rights people are all about them. They're not about getting lions, stop killing buffaloes. That's my point, broadly. That's all. And I think that's also because we're attached to eating, so we get very angry. Vegetarians and vegans get very fundamentalist. Actually, I remember, it was funny, and someone does a Facebook page for me. Someone kept saying, Robina, you should say messages, personal messages. So I did one time. Then suddenly, Nick Rebush, all these people kind of launching in, arguing with you. I thought, oh God, forget this, Janice Pulse and everything, so I couldn't forget them. I'm not going to say anything. So this particular time, I sent a picture from Liverpool in England, and I've been to this amazing cheese shop. And I had a picture of me with a kick-ass cheese. All the fundamentalist vegans, Nick included, jumping in on me. One person, how dare a Buddhist nun eat cheese, So I didn't want to be political. I didn't want to say anything, but I thought, let me do some research. So I checked up, and you just Google anything, you'll find the answer. It's like a miracle. I love it. I Google God, So I Googled how many creatures are smashed on cars when we drive. So one fellow in Holland had done some research about the number of beings who get slaughtered just on the number plate. So he extrapolated from this particular research he did that in America, like in a day or something, it's like trillions of little beings get slaughtered every day just on the number plate. So I sent that story in, and Sarah posted it, and I refrained from saying vegans and vegetarians drive cars. You know? But the other one I sent in, another story, I did some research in Australia, and some scientist who's so fed up with all the fundamentalist vegetarians, he did research that, for example, in all the wheat fields in Australia, they grow wheat. Then in the off-season, guess what? Millions and millions of these cute little field mice take over the wheat field. And he even had pictures of them, they sing songs to each other, they're cutest little creatures. And of course, when it comes time to plant the new wheat, guess what they do? They slaughter hundreds of millions of little field mice for the vegetarians. So I just think that to say that for the conclusion. Vegetarians get a little, and I think it's only because we're attached to food. We get obsessed with something. When you're obsessed with something, you get angry when people don't do what you like, you know. It's kind of interesting. I mean, people always say, I'm not, by the way, saying you should be or not should be a vegetarian. I'm not even telling you what I am. It's not your business. You understand? It's just, this fundamentalism is really distressing. It's ridiculous. It's like politics. But the point is, it's so naive to think, isn't it, that because you don't eat meat, somehow sentient beings don't suffer. Give me a break, you know. Yeah, you've got to try, but don't imagine because you don't eat meat, you're so holy. I mean, look, like the example. You drive cars, slaughter creatures every day. For the wheat, you know, all these things. And also, the thing is, I think, you know, we always say, oh, the person who kills the fish, you just as bad when you eat the fish. But excuse me, no one stands outside the, you know, the factories where they make the fishing rods. You're as bad as the fisherman. How come they don't, you know, how come they don't arrest the person who made the gun that killed the person? Nobody says they're to blame. It's only when it comes to food, and because we're so attached to food, we get all very emotional, it seems to me. You see my point here? Mm-hmm. I mean, vegetarian, the main reason that Lama Zopa Rinpoche is stressing vegetarianism now is because to get some compassion. Doesn't mean sending beings stop suffering. Don't hold your breath, please. Just get some compassion. They're fantastic. You're the beneficiary, not the fish. And the fact is, in the West also, we tend to think that demand is the main cause. That's the Western view, of course it is, for why sentient beings die, which means the more people who don't order fish, of course, it would seem less numbers would get killed. But that's not factoring in the karma of the fish to be killed. And that's not factoring in the karma of the people to kill the fish. It seems, you know, for example, the proof that it's not demand that causes sentient beings to get killed, in Maine a few years ago, I read that suddenly one season there was 4 times more lobsters popped up. Well, initially all the fishermen were so excited, of course, getting more lobsters, but it deflated the price. They had masses of lobsters. No one ordered them, but they turned up because they have the karma to be born lobsters. They have the karma to be born and killed as a lobster. Nobody demanded more lobsters, but 4 times more many lobsters popped up. So there's more than merely demand creating, you know, do you understand? There's way more than that. And of course the main reason to be vegetarian is to be compassionate. But don't think sentient beings won't keep suffering because you don't eat them. It's kind of naive.
But another benefit
Yeah.
of being vegetarian is that you create less negative karma.
No, that's what I'm saying. You're the beneficiary. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
No, and you don't create less negative. No, you don't create more negative karma. You just have compassion.
No, because
Why do you create less negative karma?
Because if you yes you do. Because
Why?
if I eat 10 scallops, that's 10 sentient beings.
But that's still
right?
okay.
So if I eat a steak, I'm sharing in the karma of the killing of that.
No, you're not. You're not. No, you're not. Not according to the teachings. If you really analyse it, I know. Okay.
And so
it's not saying you're not okay.
Rinpoche, I've heard that every time you have milk, you incur a karmic debt.
That's different, and a karmic debt. Okay, the Buddha's point would be, wouldn't it? I'm not saying don't be or do be a vegetarian. I'm just saying we should look at it in a different way, not be so fundamentalist and be more clear, and not, anyway, your point, of course. Every time we do anything, there's a karmic connection. You eat the milk. You eat a vegetable. The millions of creatures who died for the vegetables, the same thing. All those creatures who were slaughtered in the veggie garden. You can't escape it. Buddha says not an atom of space you won't find sentient beings. Like I said, just very breathing we're killing sentient beings. So of course, in that sense, of course you're right. So that's why I'm saying just being a vegetarian doesn't get you off the hook from harming sentient beings. That's all I'm trying to say. And all I'm talking about is the fundamentalism that often comes with it. That's the point I'm making. Of course, there's a karmic debt. And that's why we have to live in vows, which is intentional decision every day. I will not kill. I will not steal. It doesn't mean you won't kill, you won't steal, but when you meet a sentient being, you won't kill it. So you're sowing the seed of intentional non-killing, and that's the saving grace. That's the beacon that gets you out of samsara. We have no choice but to do that. The more we live in vows, to not kill, to not harm, to not lie, the vow gives us potent energy to it that purifies our mind 24 hours a day and helps us get out of samsara, because it's inescapable otherwise. It's a nightmare, because we can't exist without harming others. Isn't it? That's the point. Of course they can't get you. Oh, I totally agree. Yeah.
We were talking about this at dinner, and so if you're in the lower realms, any lower realms, but let's go with the animals. How do you get out of the lower realms?
The karma
into
runs out.
human?
Karma
You just
runs
run out of
Petrol
bad
tank
karma?
runs out eventually. That particular track, we've got trillions. I mean, it's immensely nuanced and complex, highly impossible to analyse. But in general, there are trillions of karmic seeds that their own kind of life, and so you eventually, it seems to me, it's like a certain track of karma will run out, will be exhausted, and then one day you're a cat for a nice Buddhist. They say mantras, and one of your human seeds is triggered. And that's why also Lama Zobramisha, I remember going, wherever he's around animals, he does everything in his power to never stop harming, benefiting animals. He's saying mantras, he takes them around stupas. I remember the zoo in Singapore one time, he's taking his picture with this big ape. All he's doing is shouting mantras in the ape's ear, There's this porcupine. But he's shouting prayers, and the porcupine's kind of mesmerised, There's, the goats in New Zealand one time, he got us to lock them in the field, get out the loudspeakers, and he read sutras to them. So this is his emphasis. Okay, it's a bit cosmic to us, but the point, like I'm saying, that Buddhism says, everything you think and see, especially you hear and see, these senses, you're taking photos of all of that and storing it. So these animals will have pictures and images of the Buddhas in their mind that can be the thing that can help them at the time of death, So he never stops trying to do that. And then giving many, many, many methods. Like you guys should have courses here of how to help animals, how to bless animals, how to circumambulate them, how to help them die, all these things for animals, because people love to help their pets, Ramshay never stops giving us methods. Unbelievable. So many ways we can benefit. And that's why even if you do eat meat, or you don't eat meat, and you go to the fish market, you can't get caught doing this, I'll throw you out. Go around saying mantra and blowing on the fish. Ramshay says even a bone that's 1,000 years old, because of the connection between that bone and the consciousness whose body it was once, and the power of mantra, when you say mantra, you purify your breath. In Tantra it says sound is the wind. Air energy is sound. And mantra is the purest of sound. So by saying mantra, you bless your breath and you blow on that bone. The consciousness that lived there once would get the benefit. So if you do eat meat, without doing that, you're not helping the sentient being whose flesh you're eating. So if you see animals, you see creatures, you see ants, you whatever, you see, other people's meat, if you can blow a mantra, or tell them to blow a mantra on it, at least it helps the being. You can thank them, but that's just good for you, not for them, Do you understand, Pete? Yeah. Time to go to bed, I think, I'm not sure.
I have a very short question.
Yes, Joe.
You mentioned a text this morning about the mind, the different senses, and then the different consciousnesses.
We have mental
it.
consciousness and we have sensory consciousness, yes.
Is that text something that's, I think you used a Tibetan...
The Low Rig, and there's lots of commentaries in English on these, yes.
Okay.
If you look up commentaries on the mental factors, the term... Low Rig is the term. If you look up commentaries on that, there's different commentaries, sometimes on just the epistemological model, which is really quite complex and extremely fascinating, how conception works and everything. And I think one of the books edited by a scholar called Elizabeth Napper on that. And then there's a book, I think, by Geshe Rabton on the commentary, very clear commentary for Westerners on the different states of mind. There's quite a few commentaries out there. Not that many, but some. I think we go to bed now. What do you think? No. So we just think we regret whatever we've done in the past since the beginning of this time, anything that we've done to harm sentient beings, because you know what, because I'm exhausted. I do not want suffering. I'm fed up. I don't want to be harmed. I don't want to be cheated. I don't want to be lied to. I don't want to keep having delusions. Forget about the lower realms. I don't want that. I'm sick of it. So I regret from the depths of my heart. So we turn to the Buddha, who we rely upon, whose methods we want to use, and we have compassion for those we've harmed. So much compassion, because we know what suffering is like. And then we think, we imagine nectar pouring in from the Buddha. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manipulaya Vajrasattva Cheno Padita Dita Mebawa Sujokaya Mebawa Subokaya Mebawa Arurata Mebawa Sarvasiri Mebayasa Sawakama Sutsa Me Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagawan Sarvatata Gata Vajra Mamimu Savadava Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe. Nectar forcing out through us, driving away every atom of negative imprint of body, speech and mind since beginning of time. How blissful. And then we think we're going to do our best. Not to kill, not to lie, not to steal, not to jump on the wrong partners, not to harm, not to break our vows. And then go to bed with a happy mind. Good night. That was 4 or 5 pounds, real quick. Thank you. It didn't take a minute. It's still 50. It's 8:52 when I close my eyes. It's 8:52 when I open them. It's less than 50 seconds. Not bad. You see, it's that quick. You can do it. Easy. Easy. Good night.